Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for joining this learning experience brought to you by EfiCode. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. Before we dive into things, I have just a couple of notes I'd like to review with everyone. First of all, we are recording our session today. So if you miss any of our discussion, if you'd like to watch again later, or if you'd like to share this with your team, you will be receiving an email with a link to access the recording on demand, and you'll get that as soon as we possibly can send it out to you as soon as we wrap up this live recording today. Now, if you'd like to get involved, there are a couple of ways to do so. The first option is to use the chat tab on the right side of your screen. So I've seen many of you have already found this function. So whenever you do, let us know from where in the world you are joining from today. If you have specific questions, we want you to send those into the Q&A panel on the right side of that chat. Sending your questions to the Q&A just helps us keep organized, and we want to be sure to answer as many of your questions as we can. If you jump to the handout section, you'll see there are a couple of resources there for you. A couple of them will be referenced throughout our discussion today, so they are there for your convenience. Feel free to jump over at any point in time to grab those. And of course, I will be selecting 2 of our most engaged attendees to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So ways to become eligible for our giveaway are to send in your chats, send in questions, and of course to fill out our post-webinar survey. That will be, it currently is in the handouts, but I'll also be posting it in the chat toward the end of our session. So our topic today is DevOps trends in the age of generative AI. I'm joined today by Marco Clemetti, CTO at EfiCode, and Stephen Walters, Field CTO at GitLab. So Marco, Stephen, thank you both so much for joining us today on Techstrong Learning. Stephen, do you want to introduce yourself and dive us right into things?
Thanks, Cody. Yes. Hi, my name's Stephen Walters. As Cody has mentioned, I'm the EMEA Field CTO for GitLab. I'm also an ambassador with the DevOps Institute, and I'm an influencer in the Value Stream Management Consortium. And with 30 years experience of performing every IT role that exists except for network engineer, I've built up a little bit of experience over time, which hopefully I can bring to all of you today and how we're looking into the future. Marco, I'm really looking forward to this, speaking with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Marco. I'm the CTO of EfiCode. EfiCode, not probably quite as known as GitLab, but we're currently 600 people in 10 countries. And what we do is we lead the movement in DevOps. We build the thought leadership there by helping customers to transform in their DevOps and in their agile work. Myself, so I've been working at EfiCode for ages, but while doing it, I'm also coding every day and have been involved in multiple startups on the way. So kind of very much deep in what's happening in the AI, also from the technical point of view. And I have to say thank you, Stephen, for being here with me. As organizations are taking the AI into use, whether it's generative AI or any other AI, we already now know that it has been democratized last year, which has made it available for everybody. We have a bunch of tools, which we're going to be also addressing today. But as organizations have their value stream, often there are bottlenecks that have nothing to do with the actual AI tooling or how AI can improve the work. And when we look at the future, and the trends as of today for AI tooling and how the organization should work, we've identified 4 trends that we're going to be talking about today with Stephen. The first one, of course, is developer experience. The second one is the actual AI-driven development, so how AI changes how we create software. The third one, real-time insights. How do we connect the organizational strategy into everyday work, and what kind of mapping can we do there so that we can see what's happening? And then last but not least, of course, security and compliance. And as we walk these through, you're welcome to post questions in the Q&A. And if we have time, we will also walk some of the questions through on each of these 4 areas, and then we can address them in the end as well. Good. Let's get straight into it. A developer experience. The first part of developer experience we want to introduce is team topologies. And Stephen, if you could just shortly go through what is team topologies? Where is it coming from?
Yeah. So first of all, let me just say I'm not on commission with IT Revolution for putting this plug in there, but this is some recommended reading. So this is the book Team Topologies by Matthew Skelton and Manuel Paes. I know that you and I, Marco, we've had discussions with the authors, but we can't recommend this book highly enough. It is one of the biggest sellers that IT Revolution have produced. The premise of it is to say that organizations need to look more closely at how they actually organize. One of the basics behind it is Conway's Law. It's kind of ironic to me that we're talking about the age of generative AI, which has come along in just the last 12 months, 2 years. But Conway's Law has existed for 60 years. And within the IT industry, we're still struggling to cope with the concept of what that is, which is that the systems that any organization's designs are typically constrained by the communication structure within that organization, which means as much as your enterprise architects, your solution architects are designing the architecture and design of your IT systems, it's probably more likely being driven by HR or management who decide what your communication structure is within your organization. Team Topologies proposes a way in which teams can be better organized with greater identification, greater responsibility, and a greater understanding of how they interact with each other. They talk about 4 team types: streamlined teams, complicated subsystem teams, enabling teams, and something we're going to touch on quite heavily today, platform teams and where platform engineering sits. But just as important are 3 interaction types: collaboration, X as a service, and also facilitation. So, you know, when you look at team topologies, something a lot of people do is they concentrate on the teams and not on the interactions. The teams mean nothing without the interactions and understanding how they interact with each other. So it's a way of actually ensuring that your teams have a great understanding of what it is they're achieving. So streamlined teams are responsible purely for getting from idea through to realization without having the overhead or the commitment of having to manage and understand the platform and the tools that they are using to do that delivery. That responsibility rests with the platform team. And it's about understanding how they interface with each other. Not everything is about direct collaboration. Sometimes having communication structures such as a service is far better in terms of enabling flow and ensuring that you get a faster flow of value through to the realization point. Hopefully I've summarized as much as possible, but if you want to understand more, read the book.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's an interesting thing. AWS has added team topologies into their well-architected framework, which is also showing that not only the technical side, but also the cultural side is becoming more and more important. When talking about team topologies, I also see that the developer experience, essentially how developers feel working in the organization, how all the daily work, how the tooling, how the actual work looks, is becoming more and more important. And team topologies is the first step to get your organizational culture in place to be manageable from the cognitive load point of view, but also the high and low context point of view. This is also something that we see as the big trends. Just quickly, high and low context means that high context means that you have to have lots of prior knowledge of the problem at hand. And low context is then trying to include the explanation or using so simple vocabulary that everybody can understand it without prior knowledge. And when building the organization from the team topologies point of view, you're also easing that kind of work. You don't have to understand everything from the platform. You don't have to, as an example, from a complicated subsystem team in automotive, this would mean like the sensors or the operating system of the vehicle. And then the streamlined teams would be the ones who are building either the autonomous functionalities or the infotainment systems or similar. They don't have to know how these complicated areas in the vehicle work. They just consume them as a service. That's kind of the starting point also to having the cognitive load lower, and then moving towards the lower context so that the developers can focus on the work at hand. The second big part of developer experience, of course, is platform engineering. One of the very, very important areas of today's both DevOps and modern software development.
And a key point that I think needs to be mentioned here is that I'm sure a lot of people have seen a lot of memes and images out there saying DevOps is dead, long live platform engineering. Please ignore that. It's clickbait. But that's not to say that one isn't as important as the other. They are fundamentally linked. They are fundamentally two of the same things. Platform engineering is a fantastic enabler for DevOps, for DevSecOps, for your transformation, and for you to enable that developer experience. As we mentioned before, it's about reducing that cognitive load on developers, allowing them to develop as quickly as possible. But it's also about stressing the importance about having stability within your platform, having stability in the way that you can actually deliver. It's you mentioned about the car industry. It's not going to be good in being able to build a car if your spanners keep breaking every 5 seconds. You need to have, understand that your production line is going to be reliable, that you're going to be able to churn out the work that you need to churn out as quickly as possible, but without putting stresses on your workforce. So it's also about simplifying those processes as well. It's about making things leaner, as lean as possible within there. So as again, that unburdens the team, but it also makes delivery quicker, and it typically makes the delivery more predictable and increases the quality levels within there. So I think that's, it's an important point to stress that, platform engineering does not replace DevOps. DevOps does not negate the need for platform engineering. The two are very much part of each other. But platform engineering itself is not a replacement for DevOps.
It's interesting. We're going back to team topologies because Manuel Pais and Matthew Skelton also coined the DevOps topologies over 10 years ago, which is still a website worth looking at, devopstopologies.com. And what they've built kind of these antitypes, and then the healthy DevOps structures in organizations, which later evolved into team topologies. But also when you look at platform engineering, and especially the key of platform engineering, the developer platforms or internal developer platforms, they have the same target as DevOps has had all the way, to be able to streamline the organization and remove the bottlenecks from unnecessary places, but also reducing the cognitive load. When DevOps started, now already 14, 15 years ago, the name was coined, the number of tools exploded. We had hundreds of different tools in place to solve various problems throughout the software development pipeline. And today we, of course, see the tool chain consolidation happening. And as we go to internal developer platforms and tools such as Backstage, we see that the integrations and kind of the big players or big tool chain providers in that domain. And one of the key areas is to go to your organization and establish the tool chain in such a way that it supports you in your efforts today and also also tomorrow. And maybe this is also, Stephen, good time for you to tell something about how GitLab approaches the developer platforms and the development tooling as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I'll come back to the point that you just mentioned. We've got to look back on the history way back when DevOps was first starting, and we had a lot of these smaller tools, and we have to thank those people who created those smaller tools and those smaller capabilities, because those are the foundations upon which we built today. But yes, the thing is that those smaller, I say smaller, those tools that had a very focused concept which were required to be integrated together to create the entire platform, that required orchestration, first of all. That required a lot of maintenance. It required a lot of overhead. And that's great for small organizations when they're starting out, because they can cope with that. But when you get to enterprise scale organizations where they have hundreds, maybe thousands of people in IT who are having to work and support that value delivery, the overhead and maintenance that's required on bringing a large number of tools together can be so burdensome, it's ridiculous. Within our own DevSecOps survey and within the Value Stream Management Consortium's State of Value Stream Management survey, they've identified that one of the greatest blockers to the delivery of value is tool chain sprawl, simply because the number of tools that they've got means that developers are spending 70 to 75% of their time on the maintenance of the platform and the tool set rather than on value delivery. So within GitLab, what we're doing is we're taking that to that next level. We're providing that basis of a platform on which to build the platform engineering. So it's not just about providing CI capabilities and providing SCM capabilities. It's about providing the capability across the entire value stream, going from idea through to realization. So it's about covering that planning capability, the integration of the tools and the verification, the testing, deployment, providing that security, the governance capabilities, and operations capabilities when you're in production. And then being able to provide that feedback across the entire value stream. And you can only do that if you have a single data store for all of that information. I mean, one of the problems that has existed is that we've had orchestration tools which have orchestrated our tools within our CI/CD pipeline, but all of the information for all of those tools is held within their own repositories. And so it's been the requirement to have manual dashboards or manual data collection to bring that information together into tools such as Power BI, which have a massive overhead themselves in you being able to bring that information together. And there is a lag in that. That information is not in real time. So the capability to view that information from that single data store in real time to get not just ensure continuous delivery, but continuous and fast feedback to allow you to improve, identify issues, and drive that through. And then added to that, when you've got that AI power in the background, and not just on the development side, but across the entire life cycle, that's when AI coming in, generative AI, can start to make real differences. Something that's come from the DORA report from Google just this last year, I think it was back in October, November, that came out. Yeah. It was interesting to see that they identified that developers were experiencing real improvement, well, through AI, small but definite improvement. However, that improvement was not being reflected through into the business. And the reason for that is it's freeing up time for the developers to do what they want, but that faster turnout from the developers means as we cascade down the pipeline, we're getting blockages further on down the pipeline. We're creating constraints further on down. So we need generative AI to provide improvements, not just at the developer stage, but across the entire workflow.
Yeah. And this is also super important when establishing developer platforms or building the internal developer platforms, to look at the full value stream and look at how the organization works and not just focus on that one particular part.
Yeah. I mean, if we're going to talk about 2024 and predictions, my prediction is I'm really excited at the thought of generative AI being used for continuous improvement to look at workflows and identify how we can make improvements. There we go. I'll throw that one in there.
Thank you. We've collected 4 questions for you to go back to your organization with, and I'll just read them out loud. The first one is, do you treat your internal platform as a product and the developers as customers? And if you look at how team topologies forms the organization, that's exactly the way that you should go about building your platform teams and the developer platform. Do you have owners for the platform? Do you know who's responsible for building it and promoting it, and also educating the organization? And then one of the super interesting parts is how does the platform team interact with other teams? So is it like we've worked with a number of organizations of building the developer platform. One of them is a good example from Denmark, TV2. And kind of one of the findings from there is the platform teams interact with other teams by understanding their needs. So if you have a platform team, their customers are the developers, which means that you have to actually focus on creating value for the customers, the developers, and not only looking inwards on what kind of features do we feel are important. There are a few interesting questions about team topologies. I'll maybe pick the one from here. How can agile teams benefit from team topologies approach? And the reason why I'm asking this from the Q&A is organizations that are agile hear that they should go to team topologies, but they don't necessarily know how it works. So if you could summarize briefly, Stephen.
I mean, it's going to oversimplify the situation, but I would typically say that most agile teams are going to be identified as stream-aligned teams, because these agile teams are made up of your developers, your testers. You would hope security are going to be involved in there if you're shifting left on your security. All of the teams, these are the teams that are responsible for value delivery. And this is the important thing to think about with a streamlined team. Its focus is on value, it's on business outcomes. And that's what an agile team is about. It's about delivering capability and function that delivers real customer value. So agile teams, they would typically sit as a streamlined team. Now, I say typically, that's because everybody has their own way of operations. And you can have agile teams, which are internally focused. They're involved in internal delivery to your streamlined teams. So, for example, your enabling teams, they may be providing the latest support in terms of new technology, new capabilities, new functions, training, education, the things that are required in order for these streamlined teams to keep ahead of what the latest trend is, without having to take their focus on their value delivery, giving them what they need to support them through that process. So being able to enable those teams in an agile way, that's an example of where, you know, an agile team around education might be involved. And again, platform engineering. If you treat your if your platform engineers are operating as an agile team, delivering your platform in an agile way. The important thing is not to think of it in terms of your agile team is this team topology type. It's to think of your team topology types acting as agile teams.
Thank you, Stephen. And now on to the next trend, which is, of course, the hottest currently, is how does generative AI change the software development? And currently we've seen that the generative AI coding tools have been introduced and they've become mainstream. I would claim that also the organizations that don't have policies or governance models in place, the developers are already using generative AI assistance. And all of the research points into the direction where we see that huge advancement is currently ongoing and coming from the actual coding and Gen AI helped coding. That we see that as one of the key trends for this year is that AI is playing significant role in all phases of the software development and not just the coding part. That was the easiest, the first one to be introduced, but actually how to build it in the whole organization.
Yeah, it's true. And it's as I mentioned before, the theory of constraints from the goal. You know, I love to quote this one, which is the fact that there is one and only one constraint in any flow of information, work, or whatever. Any improvement made before the constraint is only going to speed up the amount of work that goes into the constraint point. Any improvement after the constraint is not going to show an improvement because your constraint is already causing a bottleneck. Now, in that first instance, that's the situation we've potentially got where the focus has been purely upon developers and how generative AI can improve development, because we are releasing a constraint, a bottleneck on the developers, but the real constraint potentially within your organization, maybe later on within your life cycle. It may be how you're doing your deployments, how you are initializing your environments, how those are being created, the teams that are involved in that support. And therefore, by speeding the amount of work going into that constraint point, it's a bit like motorway traffic when it comes to the roadworks on that road. It's just going to build up more and more as you're trying to filter 4 lanes of traffic into just 2 lanes. And that is going to cause a further backlog further and further back in the organization. So really, it's important to have a balanced approach in how you're implementing generative AI and ensuring that you're just not causing problems for somebody else further on down the line.
Yeah, well, very well said. Can you also give us some examples from GitLab how you approach the generative AI also outside just the coding parts?
Yeah, so at the moment we have obviously in terms of code suggestions, that is generally available now within GitLab. But we also have all of these other areas that we're currently either in beta, or these are things that we're looking at that are on our roadmap that are going to come out. And the feedback that we've had on some of these is really interesting. So, for example, we can talk about the developing features, code suggestions, create tests, fantastic. Suggest reviewers, really powerful, actually. The number of times people, who is the right person to review that code, that can cause a bottleneck in its own right. But there's some really interesting ones later on, which are around the quality improvement. I really like the summarize the merge request review. I think that's fantastic. The ability to be able to look at a merge request, which might look like War and Peace, but you tell the AI to summarize that for you, and it brings it down to 5 nice little bullet points which explain what that merge request is about. Code explanations, explaining code. Now, it's interesting. I've spoken to some of our guys on the solution architecture side within GitLab who have been talking with customers that have been using this in beta, and they cannot express enough their gratitude for this explained code, because when you've got somebody coming in looking at somebody else's code, the ability to have that tell you exactly what this code is doing and what it's about is just so powerful. It just improves that handover capability, that knowledge learning capability. But there's other areas as well. I mean, explain vulnerability. I love this. Having that, one of the dilemmas is developers, should they become suddenly security experts or not? Well, that's an awful onus and just adding more cognitive load onto developers. So having an AI assistant that can help them to explain where there are security vulnerabilities within their code, what the results of that might be, how to actually correct that, and suggest ways in which that can be corrected, that is extremely powerful and means that there isn't so much pressure on the developers. But it also gives security themselves the capability to interface and truly shift left into the whole development process, be there as part of the development life cycle. And then there are other areas that we've got as well around generating issue descriptions. Something I've got a personal thing for is on the value streams dashboard, where we can provide predictive value stream analytics, where you're looking at your DORA metrics and it can look at predictions as to what's happening in the future. And that can be across your organization, across a team, or within a specific functional area.
Yeah, as said, AI is definitely spreading outside coding. There's one question: in what ways could AI be used to help train or upskill developers in an organization? And today, if we look at just the coding part, and we look at explaining the code, auto completion of code, generating the tests, or even commenting the code for you by AI. But then there are a few areas that if you want to upskill your developers or make their work easier on the existing code base, there are a few things. The first one, of course, is AI is really good at explaining the third-party API or library knowledge. And that could include also your code and the libraries that you need to use in your work. So feeding that information, if it's not openly already available, into the AI engines, as part of like reinforced learning in such a way that you get that information of the APIs as part of the questions for the AI. And also then learning new languages and explaining how the workspace or the projects work are something that have been already added into the AI-driven development. And those are the areas that make jumping into a new project so much easier than before.
It's interesting. I was on a CTO roundtable a couple of weeks ago, and one of the CTOs brought up the problem that they've got is with the introduction of generative AI, it's actually impacted the ability for their junior developers to actually progress, to learn. So, you know, their more senior developers have got that experience that when an issue comes in from IT operations, they know how to bury down into the code, find out where the issue is, get to that resolution. Whereas many junior developers are becoming so reliant maybe upon generative AI to produce the code for them, they're not getting that experience on where potential problems and issues are. However, having that capability such as explain the code and having that security assistant means you've got somebody there who's not just that assistant in helping those junior developers to understand what's going on, but also to educate them, to give them that experience, to give them that boost that they need to start to develop into more senior developers.
Yeah, absolutely. A few of the questions that you can take away from this session and take to your organization and find out or ask. The first one, of course, is everybody's already using generative AI for coding and coding related tasks. Does your organization already have the policies or governance in place? How have you approached it? How have you prepared for the use of AI? And as importantly as the policies and governance is, how have you prepared also to look into new technologies or look into new solutions? How would you implement them? We are just in the very beginning of the journey. New tools are being introduced. Are you capable of taking those in use in your organization? And the second one, of course, is if you're using Gen AI for coding purposes or for chatting purposes, have you been able to already expand it outside? Good. Then on to the third trend, one of my favorites, the real-time insights. So as organizations are building their DevOps capabilities, they're putting investments into DevOps efforts, they're investing into their platform teams and investing into developer experience, but oftentimes they go ununderstood, which essentially means that the investment is done because there is a pressure from the organization, or you understand that as a manager of the organization, you have to change something in the flow, or then there's external pressure. But you don't necessarily know how did this investment actually help us, or if we're investing in the future, how does it change our organization and how it works? And real-time insights is something that we see as a definite trend. And Stephen already mentioned Dora by Google, and what they've defined as the four key metrics, essentially two. The first one is how often to deliver to your customer, and the other one is in which quality. So the deployment frequency, and then lead time, essentially, how often and kind of how fast can you deliver, and then how often do you fail, and how long does it take for you to recover from that failure. And these are good starting points for the Dora metrics. But then when we jump in deeper into the value streams, we see that organizations don't necessarily even know where these metrics come from. And then again, we bump into how does this investment benefit us?
Yeah, it's interesting because, and I'll move on here into this next slide, because this comes from the 2023 Value Stream Management Consortium State of Value Stream Management report, and this is the Value Stream Management Implementation Roadmap. And the reason this is important is that this shows us how the importance of the capability of understanding the organization and the impact that has on elsewhere. I mean, I'll refer back to that earlier question that we had about where do agile teams sit within team topologies? Well, your answer is actually within here. It's in the Value Stream Management Implementation Roadmap. There is a very definitive flow here. First of all, it's around that assess and establish your vision. So in other words, where am I now and what is it I want to achieve? But then the next parts are about identifying your value streams and organizing around them. So that's about the people. So it's identifying the people first of all. Then it's mapping, which is your processes, not just your processes, but your metrics, and aligning those to that organization. And then it's about connecting, which is bringing in the tools. So it's people, process, and tools in that order. But your tools, the setup and connection of those cannot be done unless they are aligned correctly with that process and it's understood beforehand. But that cannot be achieved unless you understand your organization and how they're identified. All of that then leads you into inspection. And that inspection, again, as you mentioned, using DORA metrics and other metrics, provides you with that alignment and allows you to quickly adapt. That's where real, genuine, real-time continuous improvement comes in. Now, within GitLab, what we do is, obviously, for connection and inspection, we have the GitLab, the DevSecOps platform itself, which provides those capabilities to deliver across the value stream and to inspect those using the value stream dashboard. But those metrics then have to be used. And you can then use them within GitLab itself to apply change to how you work, what your workflow processes are, who is responsible for what particular role, when they're actually involved in the workflow process. But that connectivity, that initial setup, that setup capability within GitLab can only be done by actually mapping what it is that you need to do beforehand, understanding how you're going to work, who is going to have what responsibility, how you're going to measure that. And within GitLab, we can do that through something that's called value stream discovery, which is where we can look at the current state, identify any constraints or bottlenecks that exist within your flow and processes, and then align those to a future state that you actually want to set up, the way that you want to be. Now, one of the problems, though, that exists is, and we've had this a lot from when we go into value stream discoveries, is you say to somebody, right, I want to do a value stream discovery on a value stream, on a stream-aligned team. And most organizations, as you've seen in the question mentioned before, don't necessarily understand what a value stream is or how that aligns into their organization. And that's typically because most organizations are not aligned around value streams. In the past, we've aligned ourselves around projects. Then we've aligned ourselves around products. Now we're being asked to align ourselves around value streams. And typically value streams, the flow of those goes across teams and across different teams, with each of them having a different responsibility. So identifying those value streams and how you organize around those is important. And that's where a piece calls in called the value stream reference architecture. The PDF is available in the handouts. This is a scientific piece that I co-authored with Dr. Craig Statham from SAS Institute in May last year. And over the Christmas period, there was a blog written up on LinkedIn by David Thatcher about his implementation of it and how he went about it. And that is about realizing in a true way what our true organization is. I go back to the beginning around team topologies and Conway's law. Many organizations think, right, they're delivering to the customer, so they're a streamlined team. But without realizing that they've possibly got some core code that they are sharing with other teams that is creating a tight coupling dependency, which means they're acting more like a platform team than they are a streamlined team. And Craig, who has done this within the SAS Institute, we spoke at the DevOps Enterprise Summit in Las Vegas last year about this. He spoke about how within his organization, he followed the rules on DevOps. Every team was the same. We had no silo walls. We had product owners. We set up agile teams. But because they'd set up every team the same, and they were all operating the same way, and they were all talking with each other, it meant, using Conway's law, it was a mess. Everybody was communicating with each other. Nobody had any real idea on what their responsibilities were. Were they delivering a platform internally, or were they delivering value to the customer externally? And it was only through analysis using the value stream reference architecture, they actually discovered that only 27% of their organization was stream aligned and delivering to the customer. And they needed to turn that around, which is what they've gone on to do. But once you've got that value stream reference architecture, and once you understand what your teams are and what their team types are, and then understand what they should be, you've got an idea of, here's my current state, here's my future state. But it's by using a value stream discovery exercise, you can look into the detail of that team, typically a streamlined team, to understand where is their current waste, where have we got non-value add time, where have we got idle time, points where we need to remove that and lean our process and remove a lot of the cognitive load from our developers and remove so much of the waste to get to a desired future state where we are truly delivering value in the most efficient way possible. And of course, once you've done that, you've got basically a roadmap for how you're going to change that team, how that team is going to develop to become a high efficiency team, a highly efficient team, a hyper scaling team, as it were. And once you've got that, that's fine. You know, people will say, great, we've changed. We're now so much better. But things change. The only constant in the universe is change. Technology changes, ways of working changes, the platforms that we use are changing, the development tools we use are changing. So as a result, we're always looking at continuous improvement. So having those metrics, such as the DORA metrics, such as other flow metrics, such as the lead time and the cycle time, help us to understand how our teams are actually performing. And I stress the word teams, not individuals. We never measure individuals, we measure teams. But having that view on those teams helps us to identify where our constraints are, where our bottlenecks are, for a view purely of improvement. It's about making lives better for our developers, for a developer experience, but it's also for our testers' experience, for our planners' experience, for our operations experience. All of them deserve to have a better work-life experience, which does not produce too much cognitive load on them, does not stress them, but allows them to have fulfilling lives in terms of delivering true value to our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. As a recap from the real-time insights and especially the value stream understanding, when you go back to your organization, look if you can understand how the value stream is currently going, and do you understand how it works from the idea to the delivered feature? Do you know where are the bottlenecks in your organization today? And what is the impact? We've been talking about the developer experience. We've been talking about the AI-driven development. We've been talking about now the value streams, the real-time insights. And all of these have the aim of helping your organization to perform better, to have flow better through the stream, but also to improve the experience of everybody in the organization. Of course, developers ahead with the developer experience, but also for everybody working in the teams. Go and see if you have any places where you have such bottlenecks that you have, for example, handovers. Next, we're going to be talking about security, and handovers there especially is one of the areas that you should be identifying immediately in your organization if you have it in place or not. And then the second one, the last point, of course, is, do you have automation in place? Do you have tasks that are clearly something that you could automate but haven't been automated as of today? And how to approach that? Will it help your value stream, or do you do it only for the sake of automation? There were a few questions. Alan asked, what about security in the platform? Something we're going to answer next. And then, of course, which one should we prefer for AL/ML between DevOps and DevSecOps? One of the handouts suggests DevSecOps. And the fourth key trend that we see in the future, of course, is DevSecOps. And I am at least guilty in just abbreviating it into DevOps, because there is no DevOps without security. It's become already a mainstream. It's been there for years already.
Marco, sorry, do you have a copy of the DevOps handbook there?
Oh, yes, I do.
Yeah, please just hold that up to the screen. If everyone could read the black lettering that says where it says the DevOps handbook, it says how to create world-class agility, reliability, and security in technology organizations. And that book was written before we came up with the term DevSecOps. Security is always supposed to be aligned and part of DevOps. You know, the only reason that we had to come up with DevSecOps to implement security in there is so many people saw, oh, it's DevOps, so that's development and operations, and security got left behind. And security was also left behind for cultural reasons, because there was often a brick wall between the two where security, you know, oh, no, you can't have you development, that we're looking at that. And meanwhile, the developers, well, I don't understand security, we'll deal with that afterwards. And that does still exist to a certain amount today. So I'm going to defend you there, Marco. It doesn't really matter whether the term is DevOps or DevSecOps. To me, they mean exactly the same thing. Security will always be part of it.
Absolutely. Happy to hear. So we've already seen the shift left happening, meaning that the security responsibility is moved towards earlier in the value stream. And I see that many people have kind of misunderstood the shift left. And one of my ex-colleagues, Andy, used to say it's more like start left. So you start the security from earlier and not shift the responsibilities there. We see one of the things in the future, in order to be functionable in the organization, it means that you have to have common vocabulary. Again, we come back to the cognitive load. We come back to the low and high context. Building the vocabulary between the security and the developers is essential. If there is a security thing, let's say OWASP, not all developers necessarily know what it even means. And if you just say the number or give a very brief description of the problem, the developers might not even understand what they need to fix. So kind of building the automation and common vocabulary is something that the automation, of course, provides, but also in the organization, you have to build it in and make sure that you're not shifting the responsibility or shifting the starting points of security within the organization.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I'm not sure if it's digging up old bones or whatever, but I'm sure everybody's aware of the issue that SolarWinds had in terms of security. And when you look into the reports as to what the cause was, I mean, I know there was publicly about the email server and a junior setting the password up. But the true reason, when you look at it, it was very clever. They had an open source build tool capability. And when the hackers got inside, what they did was they actually rewrote the code for their build tool so that every time they rebuilt their own software, it injected the malware into the actual code. So they never had to hack again. The build system was doing it for them. But what this highlighted was that need for that starting security, as you say, at the very beginning. Because if the security was being applied from that very early point, the injection of that code during the build process would have been identified much sooner, much earlier on. And that is the key important thing. That's why we say shift left. What we're actually saying is we want to shift left the identification of any problems to the soonest available point that they can be found. And the soonest available point that they can be found is the very moment they are written into the system, or that they are created within there, the same as any kind of defects or issues within there. So that is really that, and that's where the importance comes in building that vocabulary between the developer and security. Security have to be seen as specialists, as enablers. So you can either have them as part of your streamlined team, or you can have them operating as a service or working as enablers, as facilitators in an enabling team, or operating almost as a platform team providing a service into the streamlined teams so that they can apply security at that soonest available point.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key word here also is traceability. So we organized TDoc, the DevOps conference, a few times a year. The next one is upcoming actually next month. But a bit over half a year ago, Kelsey Hightower was talking about SALSA, or SLSA, which is supply chain levels for software artifacts. which is essentially a way of finding ways to avoid these kind of places where the injection even happens. Stephen, can you walk us shortly through how GitLab approaches this DevSecOps domain?
Yeah. So within GitLab Ultimate, we have this capability to introduce security at all points, at any point within the workflow. And this is about providing security not just at the application layer, so providing SAST and DAST capabilities, such as you've seen there, to detect those vulnerabilities before anything goes to production. But it's also about within the APIs and with the containers. What are we doing to scan those as well, so as to protect those interfaces? It's also about the secrets detection. You know, having that capability to preserve what is ours, preserve our data and preserve our information, so as to prevent any kind of exposure that there is within the system. And the beauty is that within GitLab, you have that capability because you define the workflow. As we mentioned before, you do a value stream discovery, you determine your workflow, and you may determine it's happening later, but I need it to happen sooner. You can enable that within the workflow within GitLab. You can determine the point at which those security checks and that security testing occurs, and also determine who's involved in that, how you get involved in that, including the AI capabilities.
Fantastic. When you go back to your organizations, go and take a look how many security tools, especially in the automation domain, you have in place. Are there some areas that you need to still run manually, either the tooling or even like the security tests, or if there already is an automated tool for you to use? Go and see if you have a common vocabulary between the security and compliance part of your organization and the developing teams. Are you understanding each other? Do you know how to work together so that when an issue arises, it is addressed immediately and not only in the end of the life cycle or just before the delivery of your application? And the most important part that I recommend you to go and take a look, do you have the integration information provided for your developers as in push, which means does the automation give the relevant information to the developers working on the issue, or do you have to have the developers add into their cognitive load and workload to go into the tooling and find out how did their software or the code perform? Super. The four areas that we've been talking about today are the developer experience, the AI-driven development, expanding into other areas than just coding, the real-time insights or value streams and looking at the value streams and binding metrics into the strategy, and then security and compliance and how it's integrated into the developer platforms in your organization and in the tooling, and building the common vocabulary between the security teams and the developers, all of course following the team topologies. As last words, we're arranging, as I said, the DevOps conference. The next one is in March in London. It's both online and on site. And where, for example, the TV2 example, which I mentioned already earlier about developer platforms and building the internal developer platform and metrics, will be addressed there. And we are also going to have Matthew Skelton, who's behind Team Topologies, present in that event. That one. Thank you, Stephen. Fantastic. Now we have still a few minutes left for any questions that you might have.
All right, you're right. We do have some time for questions, and we've received a lot of questions. So let's start taking them from the top. But I'll also note the link to this DevOps conference that you're seeing on your screen is also pinned to the top of the handout section. You should see it at the top of the right side of your side of the screen. So let's look at some questions that we've received. The first one comes from Pravish. How important is it to understand developer mindset to set up IDP in an enterprise?
Absolutely vital. It's fundamental. when I'll take an example. When we're talking about the value stream discovery, for example, it's fundamental to get the feedback from the developers as to what the process is. These are the guys who are potentially feeling the pain. These are the guys who have got the cognitive load and have got the pressures that are being put onto them. So it's vital to get their feedback and their understanding and what their requirements are from them, that the platform engineers have to produce to make their life easier. But I would go further and say it's not just the developers. It's the people in security. It's the people within operations. It's everybody who's involved in the life cycle. You need to get feedback from all of them because all of them are involved in that value stream delivery. But yeah, absolutely vital to get the feedback from those people because they are the ones who are feeling the pain.
They are also the ones who are using the platform. So they are your users, they are your customers, which means essentially you have to behave like they were your customers. And if you read through the team topologies, the platform team, which actually matches pretty well with the internal developer platform team, it advises to look at the developers or the streamline teams as customers. And exactly as here, that's how you should approach.
All right, thank you guys. I'm going to go ahead and pop the next question up on the screen, but it is from Paul. Given the rapid year-over-year evolution of AI and its use cases, I wonder what could AI in DevSecOps look like a year from now? Broad organizational adoption, much more robust code checks, etc. What do you guys think?
Whew, wow.
Good question.
Very good question. How long is a piece of string? In fact, how long, how thick, how many knots can you tie in a piece of string? Who knows? Who knows? It's so rapid in terms of its development. It's going to be hard to say exactly where it is for a year from now. But I think that there are certain fundamental things we can say, which is that AI implementation is going to go further than just the developer. It's not going to be just about the developer experience. It's going to be across the whole value stream. So that for me is an absolute essential. Something I think I mentioned before. I'm not sure it'll necessarily happen this year, but it will be something that will come. Is AI's involvement in continuous improvement? We've mentioned about a value stream discovery exercise, which is where we come in, we look at your current state, you talk about your future state, we make recommendations on the way forward and how you can configure GitLab to do that. Wouldn't it be fantastic if an AI could do that for you? That would be amazing. I think that's a bit further on down the road, and that's maybe a bit of a pipe dream, but I think that's something that could be looked at. I'm not sure it'll be within a year, but year on year is something that will be achieved. And I think there will be greater refinement on the responses that you're getting from AI. AI is still really in its infancy in terms of what it's providing and its information. There's a lot of learning that's got to go into these things. And with that learning, it has to get information from various sources. It has to adapt. It has to get that information from somewhere. Now, obviously, we've got a lot of things that are going on in terms of regulation and governance and data control around AI. And we are very, very aware of that. Within GitLab, we have a privacy first policy towards our customers and the information that they hold and what they go through in terms of their development lifecycle. But these languages still have to learn. These large language models still have to develop and learn, and they need sources to do that from. So I think where we learn from is going to be something that we look at. How we control what they learn and how they learn that, I think, is something that is going to develop and change, and we will slowly start to refine. It's not to say there won't be bumps along the road, but I think we're going to be in a position where in a year's time, we're looking at the AI that we're using today and think that's pretty primitive compared to what we've got now.
Yeah. And I'll just quickly address that the fact that DevSecOps and security tools aren't employed properly in organizations as of yet, and the exponential growth of implementing those tools will continue happening. Meanwhile, we are generating new tools that are working in security using AI as an assistance. And as we train the models and have the RAG or we increase the information from our own organization, AI will also help us proactively to find issues and vulnerabilities. And as Stephen already showed, some of the tools that are upcoming and already existing from GitLab, they will continue developing and also adding functionalities from AI, which also means that as you are implementing security in your organization, also the tooling will improve as you go, and they are readily available.
All right, well, Marco and Stephen, we are at the top of the hour, so we do have to leave a lot of great questions unanswered. And I apologize for that to our audience, but we will be sending these questions along to Stephen and Marco after we conclude, and hopefully they can get back to you via email. So
Absolutely.
Stephen, Marco, thank you all so much for joining us today on Techstrong Learning. It's been such a pleasure.
No, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
So before I release our audience, a couple of final notes. We have been recording our session today, so you will be receiving this recording via email here shortly. You can also find the recording living on the DevOps website. That's devops.com/webinars. I will also put this slide up one more time for us while I close out. I will be contacting 2 of our most engaged attendees to receive a $50 Amazon gift card. So thank you for your chats, your many questions. And if you have not sent in either of those, you can still become eligible by filling out that post-webinar survey pinned to the top of the chat, as well as in the handout section. I'd like to thank Ethicode for sponsoring our program today. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. We appreciate you, and we hope to see you at a future Techstrong Learning Experience. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and you may now disconnect. Thanks again to Marco and Stephen.